obviously hits consumers. Of course, it's going to hit consumers. Capacity has to be paid for, and so very concerned about the increasing prices in the PJM capacity market. But there's another concern, and that is the reliability. The fact is that the reliability threat, I've been talking for 4 years since I got here about a coming reliability crisis driven by particularly premature retirements of dispatchable generation, and in the last couple of years, the skyrocketing load, almost predominantly driven by load center forecasts. And now we can say the reliability threat is not on the future horizon, it's actually here now. Something that didn't make it into most of the press stories, but the auction fell short of its reliability requirement. It fell about 300 megawatts short of the reliability requirement. It was covered with generation resources capacity from FRR units, which are fixed resource units. So the point of that is that the reliability crisis that I've been talking about for years is here now. This is the first time I'm told and I got this from the Independent Market Monitor, this information that the reliability requirement was not met. Everything cleared, and it still didn't meet it. So, and they covered it with the FRR. And by the way, the FRR resources are not part of the BRA. They're not part of the auction. So it is so tight in PJM. The term is tight. It is so tight in PJM now that that actually looked at 300 megawatt shortage for capacity resources. So I think there's several lessons from this. The biggest single takeaway is we absolutely need new generation. We have got to have new generation in PJM. That can be generation that doesn't retire. That can be generation that is uprated from existing generation. That can be brand new generation. We're going to have it. It is that tight in PJM now. So the reliability threat is not on the future horizon. It is now here. How do you get new gen? It has to be financed. You can finance it through rate basing. You can finance it through the capacity market, or you can finance it through PPAs, purchase power agreements, but new generation has to be financed. And another thing that really comes out of this is almost all of the load forecasts that push the demand curve out and up is data center load. It's data center load. Now, we're not going to stop building data centers. That's fanciful. I mean, if you use one of these and everybody uses one of these, everybody uses it all day long, everybody walks around with it. This is building data centers, okay? When we're on this all day long, and everybody is, anywhere, it's all running apps that are being hosted by data centers. So we live life online. We live life online. That's not going to change. So we've got to build the generation to serve the data centers and also serve everybody else. That's extremely important. So that's the number one point I want to make. I think the results of the PJM auction, our prices have now hit all-time high, but the reliability threat is really what's even more concerning, because they're right at the edge. I mean, when they have to cover the reliability requirement with FRR resources, which are not really relevant to the capacity auction, that is the very definition of tight. That's as tight as you can get, and yet we know load forecasts are continuing to go up. We know load's continuing to go up. So that demands new generation, a lot more new generation. So anyway, that's my comments on the PJM capacity auction, which just finished last couple days ago. So questions? Yeah. Yeah, Callie.
Callie with the Washington Examiner. We've seen some agencies like EPA impose additional RIFs and restructuring in the last month or so. I just wanted to see if FERC has any plans to do anything similar, or if that phase is done for the agency.
We have no plans to RIF anybody. We haven't RIFed anybody yet. We've had reorganization. We've had efficiency measures. We've had attrition that's but our attrition has been voluntary, natural. We haven't had layoffs. Yeah, Maya.
Maya Weber with Platts. As you get ready to depart the commission, do you have any thoughts about your hopes for FERC or concerns for FERC going forward as an institution? I'm thinking about things like future independence of the commission and bipartisan nature, for instance.
Mm-hmm. Well, what I said at the very end is what I hope for FERC, and that is that the people who sit on this commission always remember the people who are not in the room, because they're not represented. The people who pay the bills, the people who suffer from what we do or not do, they're not represented here. And there's really no one but us here to be thinking about them and thinking about how what we do affects them. And I hope that everybody who ever sits on this commission always remembers those people, which is the millions of people who have to pay the bills and struggle and worry about whether the lights come on or not. That's what we're here for. Yeah, George.
Hi, George Wycamp Platts. Thanks as always for doing this. I just had a quick question about some of the executive orders that have come out over the past few months regarding the sunsetting of certain FERC regulations, as well as identifying regulations that might be in violation of recent Supreme Court that might have relied on the Chevron doctrine that was overturned by the Supreme Court last year. I was curious if FERC had identified any specific regulations that could be eligible for these executive orders, and if you could have any examples that you could share at this time of regulations that the Commission might be considering adding a sunset to or overturning.
Well, the short answer is the deadline for that is late September, and I won't be here, so that's the easiest answer. But let me just reiterate what I've said at more than once at these press conferences, and that is, I think the whole idea of doing a regulatory house cleaning where you look at all your regulations and you decide which ones you really need, which ones are archaic, which ones are have stayed way too long at the fair, which ones are no longer make sense. I think that's a great idea. FERC is numbering regulations up in 4 digits now, 2023, 2222. When you're numbering regulations in 4 digits, maybe you got too many. And so so you asked for an example of one I'd like to sunset. I've said before, I'd like to sunset Order 679, which is the order which hands out the FERC candy, which I think is unjustified. Let me make one more. I'm glad you asked that, because I talked about the PJM capacity market results, and I talked about it's the highest price for capacity in the history of the capacity market. But even with the highest price for capacity in the history of the PJM capacity market, transmission costs in PJM still exceed capacity. The stuff that's really hitting people in their monthly bills, yes, capacity is particularly hitting consumers in the deregulated states. If you live in Maryland, if you live in New Jersey, if you live in Pennsylvania, in a deregulated state, you're hit much harder by those results. In Virginia, we're not hit nearly as hard because we're still a vertically integrated state and our utilities own generation, and that's a hedge. Rate-based generation is a hedge against the capacity market. And so as a Virginian, thank God, we're hedged against it. But it's the transmission costs in PJM, 80% of which are local. 80% of transmission spend is local. And that's an issue I think FERC should act on. Back to 679. 679 exacerbates and inflates those transmission costs by adding ROE adders, return on equity adders, like the RTO membership adder, other incentives. I mean, you've heard from me many, many times. I'm sure some people are very tired of hearing from me about that. But if you want to say, okay, which one would I sunset? I'd start with 679. Yep. But I got to say this, and I'll say one more thing. We have a thing called the Administrative Process Act. If you sunset anything, if you do anything that violates the Administrative Process Act, it's just going to get overturned by a court, and you've just spun your wheels to no effect. So, you have to follow the APA. But I think cleaning out a lot of regs is a great idea. I really do, and I start with that one. You want one? You want an example? Bingo, there it is. Okay, yes, ma'am.
Hi, Isa Dominguez with Politico.
Mm-hmm.
Just wanted to congratulate you on your last meeting, and very quickly ask, you wrote on X that you'd, quote, stay on for a short period into August to help get some very important work done that FERC needs to do. Would you be willing to give a brief overview over what that work might be?
Well, I can't. We have a lot of pending cases. And so a lot of them are what we call contested cases, and I can't really speak about a contested case, and I can't say, I can't give a schedule on a contested case, but we have a lot of them. And so I hope in the next couple of weeks that we get a lot of that stuff out the door. That's the point I'm making. We have a lot of stuff. A lot of it's statutory. By statutory, it means we have to hit the deadline. A lot of it's needed by, requested by, and I want to stay for at least a couple of weeks to try to get as much of that out the door as we can. This commission has a huge workload. Believe you me, it has a huge workload. And people talk about, oh, you don't meet in August, it must be a nice month. No, the workload continues. But there's really a bunch of stuff piled up for the next 2 weeks, and I want to try to see what we can do to get that work out the door the next couple of weeks. Yeah, AJ.
Thank you, Chairman. AJ Camacho with Politico and D&E News. With the amount of time you talk about Order 679, I'm beginning to wonder what FERC candy is. Is it a toffee? Is it a chocolate? But I'm following a lot of the stuff happening.
It's expensive.
So it must be from Switzerland then with their prices.
It's expensive to the people who have to pay monthly bills.
I'm covering the NRC as well, and there's a lot of reporting around an ongoing shakeup happening there. Senior staff being pushed out, discussions of the Trump administration sort of delivering expectations for how the agency will change. I'm curious if there's anything like that that's happened in FERC over the last month or two, any discussions about dramatic reorganizations, shutting down particular offices, anything like that you've heard of?
No, and I would hear about it. Okay.
Go online. Let's start with Carlos Anchandanda with E&E.
Hello, Chairman. Thanks
Carlos.
for taking the time. Your fellow commissioners each talked about, different parts of your background and experience, and I'm wondering if you can speak to how important do you think having a deep energy background is for a FERC commissioner? And do you have any comment on the nomination of David Lissert?
No. That's the answer to the second question. I'm not going to comment on nominations. The more knowledge you have when you come here, the better. I'm obviously partial to state regulators. But beyond that, Congress sets out the requirements in statute, and beyond that, it's all added detail. But it's not for me to say, what specific kind of experience you should have to come here. I'm very glad I had 17 years as a state regulator. It's been incredibly valuable and helpful to me to have had that experience. But I'm not going to go beyond those general comments. And that's it. Let me make one more point I forgot to make about Isa asked me about the next 2 weeks trying to get stuff out the door. I'm not leaving FERC with no quorum. FERC is going to have a quorum. So this commission will be able to continue to do its business. I want to make that point. They'll have a quorum. Yeah, AJ.
Yeah, thank you, Chairman. Again, AJ Camacho with E&E News and Politico. I also wanted to just see if you had anything to elaborate on with the recent NEPA changes. Of course, there was the 7-county ruling from the Supreme Court not that long ago. FERC came out with an order with new staff guidance. Mm-hmm. Commissioner C talked about it with respect to hydroelectric facilities, I believe. But I'm curious if you can elaborate on how, in practice, FERC's NEPA procedures, you anticipate those changing in the coming months relative to what we had seen in the previous years.
Well, we're going to implement our own regulations on NEPA procedures because, for 20-some years, FERC always just voluntarily followed CEQ. Didn't have to, but just chose to do it. So the CEQ NEPA procedures don't exist anymore. So it's obviously going to be necessary for FERC to do its own NEPA procedures, and that process is underway. 7-county was an very important decision by the Supreme Court. What Seven County said, and this has been and Maya knows because she's always asked me about this and she's followed this very long. Seven County addressed an issue that has been a ongoing conflict at FERC since before I got here. And that is, in doing the NEPA review, what effects does FERC have of the project does FERC have to analyze? And there was a case from the D.C. Circuit 8-9 years ago. Don't hold me to that, but it was before I got here, called Sable Trail. And Sable Trail indicated that FERC had to evaluate downstream effects of a project, like a pipeline. And that was a source of constant litigation about what did that mean. And of course, the groups who don't want to build any pipelines use that as a weapon. D.C. Circuit occasionally overturned us on you didn't do a sufficient downstream impacts. And of course, there's also litigation over, well, if you had to do downstream impacts, then you had to do upstream impacts. So if you're doing a pipeline, you got to say, well, what about the production? Where did that come from? And what are those effects? Well, Seven County basically wiped out Sable Trail because Seven County says that the agency is only required to do a NEPA analysis of the activities that are jurisdictional to the agency. Now, the agency has the discretion to consider downstream or upstream impacts if the agency believes in its judgment and its expertise that there's a nexus that's sufficiently close for the agency to go forward and do that analysis, but it doesn't have to. So Seven County is huge in terms of clarifying and ending this multi-year conflict we've had here, going back to Sable Trail. Sable Trail is null and void. Seven County has said, no, you only have to do the jurisdictional activities. Yeah, so big deal. Callie.
You said earlier in your remarks that new generation needs to be financed, and we saw this week that the Department of Energy pulled the $4.9 billion loan for Grain Belt Express. Do you have any reaction to that and the transmission line project?
Well, transmission is not generation.
NV Energy has said that it will add about 5 megawatts of new generation across 4 grid regions.
Look, I've said this a lot. I'll say it again. Transmission, which, as I say, is one of the, if not the biggest driver of people's power bills. Transmission, not capacity. Even in PJM, not capacity. It's transmission. Transmission, and I say this as a state regulator who voted to approve over 100 transmission projects, okay? I voted to approve over 100 transmission projects in Virginia as a Virginia regulator. And so I'm not anti-transmission. I voted for over 100. But transmission needs to be built to serve consumers, not to serve special interests, not to serve agendas, political agendas, ideological agendas. Transmission needs to be built to serve consumers. And there are ways for transmission providers to evaluate transmission projects in very objective ways to determine, does this support reliability? Is this what's called an economic project, which quite simply means that the congestion savings costs are more than the cost of the project. That's very objective data that you can get. So we need to build transmission. We need to build transmission that is very closely monitored, closely vetted, because the transmission line is a very, very costly capital asset. These are high CapEx projects. And then when you add on to that the sticker price of a transmission asset, the sticker price is only a fraction of what it's going to cost. I know this as a state regulator because the sticker price, if the sticker price is X, over the life of the project, when you add in ROE and other financing costs, the actual price to consumers is going to be 7, 8X. So when we're inflating that here at FERC, and we do with these incentives and these ROE adders, that's inflating what's an already big sticker price. So build transmission that's needed to serve consumers. That's always been my guideline. And that's what we did in Virginia. Our statute was approve transmission if it is necessary and prudent. So need had to be shown first. And prudent was as to cost. I think that's a very good standard. If it does, build it. Yeah, George.
Hi, once again, George Whitecamp with Platts. I just wanted to ask about the your comments on the PJM capacity market. As you know, you mentioned that the auction met its price cap, that the FERC approved price cap.
Mm-hmm.
But as you know, the price cap is temporary. Is there anything else you think FERC could do or should do in the next few years to address these rising capacity costs?
I think the problem of the rising capacity costs in PJM, really, if you look at, a lot of it is states are, and I made this comment at the tech conference, the technical conference we had on resource adequacy. We're going to have to build generation. There are basically three ways to do it. You rate base it, meaning it's in Virginia we rate base a lot of generation. Our nuclear units are still running because they're rate based. You can rate base it, which means it's paid in regular rates. You can ask independent developers to depend upon the capacity market for their financing, a new generator can cut a purchase power agreement potentially with a data center to be the sole supplier, and then they can finance it from the PPA. So I don't know outside of those three main ways if there's other ways to finance generation. I'm unaware of those. So I think those are the three most common, and the most common is traditionally has been rate basing. And then the second most common for the last 20 years, since the era of deregulation, was telling independent generators to find their money in the capacity market. I think what you're seeing in PJM is, quite frankly, the capacity market, which in my early years as a Virginia regulator, the PJM capacity market, the prices were really low. And the reason the prices were really low was because PJM was extraordinarily long on capacity, meaning there was a ton of capacity in PJM. I went on the Virginia Commission in 2004, and the excess over the reliability requirements was running as high as 40%. Okay, 40% surplus, and the one that cleared this week didn't even hit the reliability requirement. It was about, I think it was a couple hundred megawatts or short. So that's what's happened in PJM, is a lot of those generators have shut down. And at the same time, we're seeing load going up, largely almost totally driven by data center forecasts, load forecasts. So there's a lot that's packed into that. I think a lot of that also comes down to state policies. States have, there's states who chose to put their reliability into the basket of the capacity market. I know a lot of them are dissatisfied. We hear from governors, they're dissatisfied. There are states like Virginia that did not put every egg into that basket, kept some rate-based generation as a hedge. I personally think that was a smart decision on Virginia's part. I think events have proved it was. But a lot of states are going to make a lot of decisions about how they want to finance generation and how they want to go about it. And that's going to be a state decision ultimately. The results of the PJM capacity market, I'm not implying in any way, shape, or form it's PJM's fault. PJM is the entity that runs the market, and the results are the results. And it clearly shows that we've been losing generation in PJM. At the same time, we're seeing unheard of load forecasts. As a state regulator, we never saw load forecasts like this until about the last couple of years. And when you talk to a Virginia regulator about data centers, just like talking to Jonah about the whale, we are ground zero for the world in Virginia for data centers. So we saw it coming. We saw it coming early, and now it's here, and it's tight. It's just tight to the nth degree now in PJM.
Let's go online to Tom Tiernan.
I see Tom Tiernan. Hey, Tom.
Hi, thank you for doing this. Appreciate it. I have a question on E1. Commissioner Chang mentioned 2 exemptions that are being included, giving NERC authority to provide feedback on the inverter-based resources. The press release says the rule will go into effect 30 days. And maybe this is more a question for staff, but I'm wondering about the exemptions because NERC and several ISOs registered concern about allowing exemptions given the events of when these resources trip offline.
The order doesn't give
So-
exemptions. It asks NERC to make an examination of whether there should be additional exemptions.
Okay, so it's allowing NERC to see if exemptions are suitable?
Right. It's not telling them to do it.
Okay. But I was wondering if you have concerns given the comments that came in from NERC and ISOs.
I don't think. I don't think.
Basically listing concern about exemptions.
I don't think they should give exemptions. I think the reliability standard should be applicable, but it takes 3 votes to do anything around here, and so there's some language about asking them to consider whether exemptions would be appropriate.
Okay, thank you.
I personally don't favor exemptions. I think the standard is the standard, and standard ought to apply. But it's going to be NERC's decision.
Okay.
Let's go to James Downing with RTO Insider.
Hey, James.
Hi. Yeah, sorry I couldn't make it down there. I'm dealing with a case of COVID. But
Really?
since it's your last meeting,
Sorry to hear
sorry
that.
about it.
I was looking forward to seeing you.
Yeah. Since it's your last meeting, can you just kind of give me a sense of like, what do you think is your biggest accomplishment in your time at FERC? And even though you've got a couple weeks left, is there anything that you think is going to be left unfinished that you wish you could have gotten done?
A lot of stuff I want to get done. Probably not going to get done in 2 weeks, just because 2 weeks ain't much time left. It takes 3 votes around here to get anything done. I've been pretty vocal about a lot of things. I've been very vocal about the transmission costs and the incentives that we give out, and that ought to not continue. But again, it takes 3 votes to do anything around here. I think that it's hard to say what's the single biggest thing we when you do those letters, like I started doing back in February, because I wanted to show, when I saw that email went to all of our staff saying, explain, write down 5 things you did last week, like you didn't do anything. And I said, well, FERC does stuff all the time. So I started doing those letters, and when you read those letters, and it's just remarkable what we do around here. It's just remarkable. And I think it's hard to say what I'm most proud of. But being chair, I'm very proud of what we got done. And those letters really detail the important things we got done. Every week, every day. It's amazing what's coming out of this agency to support reliability. Now, again, I've been, as someone who I think there's things we should have done, could have done, we didn't do, couldn't get the votes. If you remember, in April of 21, I joined with 2 Democratic members to cap. It was Chairman Glick and Allison Clements, and the previous year, FERC had previous majority had voted to raise the RTO adder from 50 basis points to 100, make it perpetual, and not even require that it be as a result of a voluntary action of joining an RTO. And fortunately, Chairman Glick and then Commissioner Clements wanted to ask me if I joined them in rolling back that 100 basis points to 50, and I said, hell, I'll go to 0. So I think they were surprised to hear that. But we put out a supplemental NOPR, a notice of proposed rule, which rolled it back from 100 to 50, capped it at 3 years, and made it that you had to show as voluntary. Well, guess what? That was a supplemental NOPR, and that has never been called for a vote. It wasn't called for a vote under Chairman Glick, even though he was the chair. It wasn't called for a vote under Chairman Phillips. And it hasn't been called for a vote under Chairman Christie. Why? Because I can't get 3 votes. It's that simple. So yeah, that is something that I regret, that we didn't. I couldn't get 3 votes for that. But it just shows you, FERC is constantly lobbied. All right, constantly lobbied. And again, the people in the room who are paying the bills are not here lobbying or represented. They're just not. James, let me say something while you're on the line. I want you to send this message to Rich Hydorn, if you don't know. RTO Insider, and I'm not giving an advertisement here, although the free lifetime subscription wouldn't be bad. But once I'm gone, I can take gifts in. But I started, Rich Hydorn and his wife Mary started RTO Insider about the time I became a commissioner. It was way back in like 2004, 2005 timeframe. And I remember because originally it was like PJM Insider. And it originally, I remember it was like a one-page front and back mimeographed, came in the mail. And I started taking it then. And I've been reading it, every issue since then. I've probably read every issue. And so James, tell Rich I really have a lot of admiration for what he built. I mean, it started as, again, this little one-page newsletter just on PJM. And, now it's, this big thing. But pass on my admiration to Rich for what he built, over the years. I read RTO Insider. I read it in the morning. I pick up a cup of coffee and start reading it. And I read about some order we put out. And I'd always say, like, we did that, and because sometimes I read it to find out what we did. But congratulations to Rich, and I've enjoyed it for 20 years. And that's not to everybody here does a good job, by the way. Everybody here does a really good job. But I admire what Rich and Mary did because they started something from scratch, and I think that's really an admirable thing. And they built a really important piece of journalism, not cheap. And again, lifetime subscription would be nice. You can just call it back pay.
I'll pass along the message.
Copy. Back pay for all the copy I've given you. Okay. But anyway.
Okay, let's go to.
Thank you.
Thanks, James. Let's go to Ethan Howland with Utility Dive.
Hey, Ethan.
Hi, Chairman. Thank you for this. I'd like to ask you about basically FERC's independence as an agency and just how you think about it. Is it important that FERC maintains its function as an independent agency?
Yeah, independence really comes down to the different structure of an agency. I actually have personal experience because I came from the Virginia State Corporation Commission, which is also considered independent, and it is a very different type of independence. The Virginia Commission is created by the Constitution of Virginia. Its independence is guaranteed in the Constitution of Virginia. The chief executive, the governor, has really nothing to do with it, doesn't make the appointments. So the Virginia Commission is independent in the truest sense of the word. FERC is statutory. FERC is created by the DOE Organization Act. So independence is different at federal agencies than it is in a place like the Virginia Commission, which is created by the Constitution of Virginia, and its existence is guaranteed. Commissioners cannot be fired by a governor. They're elected by legislators. You get a 6-year term and typically get reelected in Virginia. So it depends on this. It all really depends on the structure, Ethan, of now the thing about federal agencies like FERC is, I've said this before too, every presidential administration doesn't want an agency, doesn't want a commission that's like totally contrary to what their basic policy goal is. That's not new. Go back and read about how the Obama administration basically wrote the net neutrality regs, gave them to the FCC, and told them to pass them, and they did. So this is not unusual that federal agencies are influenced by a presidential administration. It's a fantasy to think that a commission is going to go off totally contrary to what a presidential administration wants. Order 1920, my dissent to 1920, pointed out, and I brought the receipts. Many of the receipts were articles by you all, and particularly Kat Morehouse. I should have paid her royalties. But 1920 was absolutely the Biden administration net zero policy turned into a regulation. It absolutely was. And all the I don't know if Brad Plumer's on the line from the New York Times. I quoted him a couple times in my dissent, saying this was the Biden policy. So there's really nothing new in history about presidential administrations wanting these so-called independent commissions to at least be not contrary to what they want to do. Not necessarily doing chapter and verse what they want to do, but not being contrary. So really history, and AJ did a story about the Johnson administration. Do you seriously think Lyndon Johnson didn't tell commissions what he wanted? He did. And if you read the Robert Cairo books, he got rich doing that, by the way. Cairo details it and by the way, gratuitous book recommendation. You need to read the Cairo history and series on Lyndon Johnson. If you want to understand Washington, if you want to understand political power and how it's exercised, you really need to read every book in the Robert Cairo series on Lyndon Johnson. What he got out of the Federal Communications Commission, he got rich out of the Federal Communications Commission. Okay, he got TV licenses and radio licenses, and Cairo details every detail of how he did it. So nothing like that here, I can promise you.
Well, Chairman, can I follow up and just ask, since you've been chairman, has FERC shared any draft orders or draft guidance documents outside of the agency?
Well, AJ had a story where he had a leaked document that, of a NOI, I think, but no one ever voted on it. We haven't shared anything that we voted on. We don't, until we vote, it doesn't exist. I mean, until we vote, it's not a rule, it's not a regulation. We have to vote on something. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you, Chairman.
Mm-hmm.
Thanks, Ethan. I think we have one more question online. Carlos, or did you forget to put your hand down?
No, I still had one.
Okay.
Thank you. I wanted to ask about the CP2 LNG projects. Environmental groups have, sued FERC over this and have talked about how the Louisiana Department of Environmental Quality, hasn't issued the necessary air permits for that project, but FERC authorized, limited construction. Do you have any comment on that lawsuit or, FERC's decision to authorize that construction?
Not specifically on that one, because it's obviously it's going to be litigated. Because one thing I've learned in the last 4.5 years here is every single CPCN we issue, every single one, is going to be litigated in court by groups that do not want to build any pipelines, build any LNG. They're going to litigate it. They're going to challenge it. We go to extraordinary lengths. We have a great legal staff. We try to do orders for CPCNs, CPCN being the permit, that are in accordance with all the applicable statutes like NEPA. NEPA is obviously a big part of any CPCN. So we go to extraordinary lengths to try to make sure that our CPCNs are in accordance with all the applicable laws. That one is too. I think we got it. We hit it right. But it'll, like every other CPCN we issue, it'll be litigated, and hopefully the court will see it that we did it right.
Tom, do you have another question?
Yeah, this may be too detailed, nuts and bolts on the E1 on the IBRs. I just want to make sure I understand the process right, because the order's not available. That the exemptions would be, it's up to NERC to decide whether to allow exemptions to the rule.
Right.
If I have that correct.
Right.
Okay. So the rule will take effect based on the input, but there could be exemptions down the road.
Well, if NERC decides to, it's up to them. They're
Okay.
not required. They're not required to. It's up to them. They're not required to. We didn't say you have to do it. We said you should consider it, and they'll consider it, and they'll make a decision whether to have exemptions or not have exemptions. FERC is not telling NERC to have exemptions. I personally don't think there should be exemptions, but the order lets NERC determine whether there should be, and the point is it's discretionary.
Okay. And thank you for engaging here. You said it takes 3 votes to do anything. The vote, as I recorded, was 4 yeses. So I don't know if there's going to be
Well, I mean,
when you say it,
it's a
when you say it takes several votes, that leaves the impression that
it's a truism.
There was a challenge.
I was just stating a truism. It's a truism that every order is a product of some compromise.
Okay.
That's just a truism.
All right. Thank you.
That's just a truism, Tom. It doesn't mean that.
Thank you.
The vote on that order was 4-zip.
Yep. Okay.
Yeah, Maya.
I have one more question related to independence. I'm wondering if you've been following some of the decisions in the Supreme Court's emergency docket. Does it appear as though Humphrey's executor is going to be overturned, that the Supreme Court is telegraphing that, or does it seem effectively that the removal authority is changing?
Well, I don't read every decision. I have a hard enough time reading all of ours. But you know, AJ and I have had this conversation. If you read SELA law, it's not very far from SELA law to Humphrey's executor repeal. It's not very far. Now, it may not go that far because of the concern, because FERC is a multi-member commission, but and it may not, and the Supreme Court may not, and so. But beyond that, you know, if I teach law again, I'll certainly be teaching SELA law, and whatever Supreme Court opinion, probably in NLRB Wilcox will probably decide that question. If I had to predict the case that will decide it, I'd say the NLRB case. But I'm not predicting what the Supreme Court does. I would never do that. Yeah. Okay.
More questions? Online? Any questions online? Okay. I think that's it.
All right. Thank you, guys. It's been fun. Oh, let me just correct something. I think I said PJM was 300 megawatts short of the reliability requirements, about 200. But it had to be covered with FRR assets, and that's the first time ever.